How's it going, Giants fans? My name is Alex, my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo, and we'll want to discuss a little bit of news coming out about Kadarius Toney, rather just the entire wide receiver core for the New York Giants. NFL Insider Jeremy Fowler believes that there are teams kind of keeping tabs on Toney and seeing kind of what's going on with his injury situation. Of course, he had the hamstring issue and then got the other hamstring issue shortly after that. So he's missed the last 4 consecutive games, hasn't been able to contribute, unfortunately, toward this pretty impressive winning streak that we have going on here. But wanted to discuss what that looks like, in terms of if the Giants would actually consider trading him, what the value they'd get in return for him, and if it's even worth it at the end of the day. Of course, Toney is one of the most talented players on the roster. When he's healthy, he is capable of taking over a game. He's capable of turning a game on its head, making a big moment look easy with his agility and mobility. And honestly, I kind of get the sense that a lot of people want him to stick around just because of that potential. And I think that's justified, right? I think that there's a lot to love about Toney in terms of his talent, his pure, clear-cut talent. But obviously, we've been waiting quite a while for him to actually, get healthy and stay healthy. I think that's kind of the entire MO right now is when is he going to be able to contribute at that high level? When is he going to be able to show us all of the qualities and talent that we know he contains? So I kind of want to discuss that. What it might look like if a team tried to come after him and what kind of draft capital it may look like. But Anthony, before we dive into this interesting, topic and kind of debate this really quickly, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great. I think this is a really interesting topic. The Giants are a surprise team right now. They're 5-1 through 6 weeks, and they're doing all of that without certain talented players that they thought would be on the field. So no Kenny Golladay, they're winning anyway. No Kadarius Toney, they're winning games anyway. So now it begs the question, why hold on to these players who aren't playing, and when they are on the field, are barely playing or not playing well? Why hold on to them? And I think that is a very valid question that the New York Giants are pondering right now. If they're winning football games with the talent that they're currently playing with, maybe they don't need the talent that they're waiting to return, and they can go ahead and just move on, continue to play with the team that they have, and get some extra capital for the future. That makes sense to me, and I think that the Giants are kind of thinking about this clearly. I think they're onto something here, because at the end of the day, I loved Kadarius Toney, and I really wanted to see him have that big breakout season, but it's not coming to fruition, and it doesn't look like it's going to come to fruition. So the Giants have some questions about Kadarius Toney. They need to find out some answers and maybe start planning for a future without him on the field, which is kind of like the present anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's kind of the reality of the situation is the Giants are winning games. They're 5-1, and Kadarius Toney has not contributed toward them. He played minimal snaps in week 1, minimal snaps in week 2. And here, so there's 2 arguments to make, right? The one argument you kind of just hinted at is that the Giants are winning games without him. So why do they need him? That's argument number 1. The flip side of that is the Giants are winning games. They're 5-1. Imagine what they're going to be like when he is healthy. He's going to help the offense tremendously. He's going to help them significantly. The question is, when is he going to be healthy? When is he going to return? He's not practicing. And obviously things are, not ideal at the current moment. But, there's hope that he can get to that point where he is 100% healthy. You suggested the idea a couple weeks ago that maybe they just put him on IR. But I think that there's a salary implication for that because they have to pay somebody else while he's on IR. So the Giants don't have a lot of money and they want to retain as much as possible in case anything happens or they need the cash flow. So they're keeping him on the roster for the time being. But, if another team came out of the woodwork and said, we're intrigued by his quality, we know what he's capable of doing on the football field, and we're willing to wait until he's healthy. We have a team that's good enough right now that we can wait and give him the time necessary to heal up and provide some value maybe in the playoffs. If there's a team that is kind of capable of trading for him and making that push. So it's an interesting discussion to have. Specifically, Jeremy Fowler, these are the 2 quotes that he had. He said, teams are also keeping an eye on Toney, who has 2 catches for 0 yards on the season and has struggled to stay healthy. Mostly teams want to know what's up with Toney. And essentially whose obvious talent has been overshadowed. So, the injuries have definitely plagued him, overshadowed all of that quality that he does contain. He also mentioned that rival executives wouldn't be surprised if general manager Joe Schoen tries to make a move here regarding Toney, or, even Darius Slayton was mentioned too. He took a big cap hit and is a player that could be on the trade market as well if they were looking to, maximize his value because he's had a couple decent games. But again, I don't think we're in a place to be trading wide receivers to begin with. Are you really going to get rid of Darius Slayton right now? Who replaces him? Marcus Johnson's looked okay. We're getting Wan'Dale Robinson back. Maybe Toney comes back. Maybe Golladay makes an impact. You can't trade Kenny Golladay right now. His cap hit's too high. The dead money's too high. You can't even afford to do it. So Kenny Golladay is locked into the season. He's not going anywhere. Kadarius Toney could be, depending on the draft capital. But, from your perspective, if a team came calling and said, we're willing to offer you this, what would be the least amount you are willing to take for Toney? I think it would have to be a pretty substantial number. Given his talent and what we really just haven't seen yet, it's hard for me to move on from him unless we're getting something pretty decent in return. What are your thoughts on that?
I honestly, I don't think that he has much value. He hasn't played at all this season, really. When he played last year, yes, he was electric, but we're kind of riding the high of that one incredible performance that he had against the Dallas Cowboys. Other than that, I mean, yes, he made some plays here and there in some big games, but at the end of the day, he barely played. He's been injured for 2 years. He hasn't been able to get back on the field. He's been out for weeks now. I can't imagine that a team actually sends anything substantial for Kadarius Toney's talents. I think that, yes, he was a first-round draft pick last year, and there was a few teams that wanted to take him in the first round. But if you recall, there was a lot of teams that thought he was more of a second-round pick or more of a third-round pick. There were some teams that had major red flags on him and weren't willing to take him in the first round, despite his obvious talents on the field. So now, with all these injuries piling up, I just can't imagine that a team is going to want to throw away a top 3-round pick. I feel like it's going to have to be a mid to late round pick, and it might even be a conditional pick for Kadarius Toney. But at this point, the Giants aren't getting anything out of Kadarius Toney. They might as well try and get a draft pick out of him so that they can get something in the future. Right now, Joe Schoen has proven to be pretty decent at finding mid-round talent. He got Daniel Bellinger in the 4th round. Darian Beavers looked really good in the preseason. Unfortunately, he got injured, but Micah McFadden has also been contributing. Joshua Zito, when he's on the field, he looks like he's got to develop, but he's contributing. He's still playing as a decent backup. I think that Joe Schoen is probably going to be more willing to bank on his mid and late round draft picks that he can get out of Kadarius Toney than banking on Kadarius Toney right now, a player that just can't stay healthy, a player who has been swirling in the trade block and all the different rumors throughout the media ever since Joe Schoen got here. So I think when you're looking at it from that perspective, a lot of teams might be willing to give Kadarius Toney that change of scenery, but at the right price. They're not going to overpay for Toney. Again, this is a receiver who just has barely produced anything on the football field. If you're trading for him, you're trading for him because you liked him as a draft prospect almost 2 years ago at this point, a year and a half ago. So really, realistically, I think that a team trades a mid or late round pick for him, and I think that the Giants would be enticed to take that offer and just bank on their own drafting in those middle and late rounds, add some capital for the future, and just keep trying to win games without Kadarius Toney because they're winning them without him anyway.
Do you think there's a world where maybe we look to trade him for a player and not draft capital? I think that might be something to consider.
I think that is something to consider, and I think that there is a world where that happens, but I think right now, again, the Giants don't necessarily need to add more talent to their roster right now because they are trying to continue their winning. They have the talent on the roster to win. They have the coaching staff to win. They're winning games. They don't necessarily need to add anyone to their lineup. So that's kind of the same thought process with Kadarius Toney himself. When he's ready to return to the lineup, they don't need him to. And it might just create too many cooks in the kitchen, too many mouths to feed. It might actually mess up the flow of the offense at this point to try and inject Kadarius Toney, especially with Wan'Dale Robinson just returning to the lineup, him playing well in his first game back, and they want to build on that. So now if you throw Kadarius Toney back in there, it might just create more problems. So I think that for the Giants, what they're really thinking is we're winning a lot of games, which is, of course, hurting our draft stock, but that's okay. Let's keep winning, but let's also recoup some of that draft stock by getting some capital in those mid and late rounds by trading away a player that we're not using.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting conversation to have in terms of like what you'd be willing to take from him. So if you're watching the video, make sure to leave us a comment in the YouTube section and let us know, like, what would you be willing to trade or acquire in exchange for Kadarius Toney, who obviously has unparalleled talent, but simply can't get on the field to use it. So, they've really sat him right. Okay, so this is the most annoying thing for me that really gets on my nerves. It's like he's been out for 4 consecutive weeks, right? You would imagine that during those 4 weeks he's been out, he's been getting healthier, right? Because that's like normally how injuries work. Like you're getting healthier, you're rehabbing during that time. But instead, he's actually picked up another hamstring injury during his rehabilitation, during the time he's been rehabbing. which is very concerning to me, right? And I think most of you guys would agree. Do I think that Toney doesn't want to be on the football field? Absolutely not. I think he wants to be on the football field, but the fact that he's getting injured while rehabbing is what frustrates me the most, because like if he was getting injured playing the game, he was on the field, he was toughing it out, I'd be like, like that's totally reasonable. Like, guys get injured. It is what it is. The NFL is just that. That's the nature of the game. But he's getting injured while barely even practicing, which is hard to wrap my head around sometimes, and why I am a little bit more concerned now than I was a couple of weeks ago. The situation has changed. When he first got here, there was hope that he would be healthy. He was injured during training camp. He was injured during preseason. He was injured to start the year. He's still injured. And I think that the coaching staff, the situation between them and him have kind of changed a little bit, because while he's still hurt, Brian Dable and Kafka are devising game plans that don't include him, right? They're devising game plans around the players that are healthy. Saquon Barkley went out there last week and played through a pretty, I wouldn't say serious, but a mild shoulder injury. You could tell he was hurting. You could tell he was injured. He toughed it out, man, and I respect that from him. I think hamstring injuries are a little bit more serious, and I just had one recently, and I could barely walk, but I'm sure whatever Tony's dealing with is legitimate. But at this very moment, it definitely is worthwhile considering what his value would be if the Giants do listen to any offers, or any teams do come calling and say, well, let's just trade for him now and let him buy low on him and let him sit on the bench or on the IR until the playoffs roll around. And then bam, you have yourself a healthy Toney in some of the biggest moments of the season. If I'm a playoff contending team, maybe I'm considering that right now. What a team that could really use him right now, or he would actually feast? The Chiefs. The Chiefs just freaking turned $4 million of Travis Kelce's salary into a base salary, whatever, a bonus. So they cleared up a bunch of cap space. They're clearly looking at some moves. Some people are saying OBJ maybe, but maybe they're looking to trade for somebody. Maybe they're looking to take another contract. A healthy Toney with Patrick Mahomes is a very dangerous and scary thought. And with that being said, that's why everyone's so worried about trading him in the first place. Because if you trade him away and he gets healthy and he's on a contending team, and suddenly that contending team is kicking serious ass and he's having a great season the rest of the way, you're like, crap. That's why 5-1 Giants right now, you're like, why not just wait until he's healthy and he's ready to play? Because that value is going to make us even better. The question is, and it always will remain, is when is he going to be back? And right now there's no answer. Nobody knows. The media doesn't know. Dable doesn't know. Shane doesn't know. It's all up in the air. So that's kind of like where we are. We're kind of left in purgatory right now, trying to figure out what to do with him or what his role is going to be in the future. Because ultimately, we've learned from this Giants team, we've learned from the coaching side that if you don't practice, you're not going to play. He's got to be practicing every day, or at least every other day, for the majority of the week before they can commit to him. Like, this isn't a situation where he can practice 1-2 days and then suddenly he's playing. He doesn't even have any real experience in the playbook yet, right? He's played less than 30% of snaps in two games. He played 12% of snaps in week 1. This is a player that hasn't really been fully integrated. So I don't necessarily know what they see his future being on this team, but what are your thoughts? What are your final thoughts on just the future of Toney this season? Do you think they actually feel confident he can make an impact moving forward?
I feel like they don't, to be completely honest. I feel like if they felt confident that he could make an impact, then when he was healthy and available in those games earlier in the season, he would have played more. But one of those games, he barely played at all. He had, 7 total snaps in week 1. He was healthy enough to play. They just chose not to because, yes, he's not healthy enough during the week to learn the playbook. And it's also just they probably don't trust him. And so, yeah, you're asking me, do you think they're confident in him? Do you think they want to make him an X factor in the offense? I think if they wanted to do that, they would have done that when they had the opportunity to, and they chose not to. They actively chose not to utilize Kadarius Toney. So they had the opportunity, and they just decided to go with a different offensive game plan. And I don't think that they're eager to get him back. I think they were eager to get Wan'Dale Robinson back. Soon as he returned to the lineup, they had him heavily utilized in the offensive game plan. But I don't imagine that they feel the same way about Kadarius Toney right now. And that's pretty shocking in some aspects, but it's also just sometimes the best ability is availability. We learned that with Eli Manning all those years, and having someone who's reliable, who goes into the lineup and plays well, that's important. And the Giants probably don't feel like they have that with Kadarius Toney because A, he hasn't been in the lineup, and B, when he is in the lineup, is he that reliable? I don't really think so. So yeah, going forward, it's going to be interesting to see what the Giants decide to do here. I personally feel like they are leaning towards trading him. and I'm personally leaning towards trading him myself at this point, which might be shocking to a lot of long-term viewers of this channel or listeners of this podcast. I've always been a huge Kadarius Toney fan. I like him a lot, especially because my name is Tony and his last name is Tony. So I'm like, this is perfect. I can root for somebody and wear my name on the back of my jersey with a different spelling, and it was a lot of fun. But I'm at this point now where the New York Giants are winning football games without Kadarius Toney. We don't need Kadarius Toney. I'm cognizant of the fact that our draft stock is declining with every win that we gain. I want to make up some of that difference by trading away a couple players. That's just personally how I feel. So whether that be Kenny Galladay, whether that be Kadarius Toney, or anyone else who's just not playing that well or not playing at all or not utilized in the game plan, let them get their change of scenery. I'm sure Kadarius Toney would leave, go to a contender, and have a great career. Good for him. I'll root for him on that team. That's awesome. But I don't envision it happening with the Giants. Do I want to be wrong about that? Absolutely. I want him to be a Hall of Famer with the Giants. I want every Giants player to be a Hall of Famer, but I just don't see it being a realistic route to completion here for Kadarius Toney. It just doesn't seem like that's ever going to come to fruition. So I'm personally in the boat where if the Giants are ready to trade him, then so am I. If they're ready to keep him around, then absolutely. I want to keep him around. I want to see him be great. I just don't envision it happening right now. So these rumors are coming out now. Of course, they're going to start to heat up. There's probably, I want to say there's 3 more weeks until the trade deadline. So we'll see how this progresses. If any teams call the Giants, make some offers. But at the end of the day, like I said, man, it's time to start recuperating some of that draft stock that we're losing here. And I think the Kadarius Toney is the best way to recoup some of that capital.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty reasonable argument. I think that's pretty fair and neutral. We'll see what the Giants do. We'll see what Joe Schoen does. He doesn't owe any loyalty to any of these guys, for the record, right? The only ones he owes any loyalty to is the ones he just drafted. Everybody else is, in my perspective, except for maybe Saquon right now, was really helping to carry the team. And maybe DJ is playing a lot better, and Dexter Lawrence. There's a couple of like marquee names, Andrew Thomas, that are guys I would not trade, but everybody else I think is up for grabs. You know what I mean? Like everybody else that's not making a significant impact right now, or not playing, or simply just not living up to their expectations or hopes, should be available, and everyone that hasn't been drafted, with that same breath. So. I'm definitely curious to see what the Giants do. Definitely curious to see what Kadarius Toney's future looks like. Of course, as you said, would hope for him to be a Hall of Fame player, an amazing player at the very least, for this team, and remain healthy over the next couple of years. But, we'll see what happens here. Definitely an interesting situation. But as always, I'd love to hear perspectives, opinions, and narratives below in the YouTube comments. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.